Hello, I'm Dusty. Today I'll be expressing my views on macros in Final Fantasy XIV and why I believe you shouldn't be afraid of using them on your combat classes, especially before Endwalker. First, let me explain what a macro is and how it works. A macro is basically a sequence of text commands performed per instruction. Uh, If you aren't already aware that you can type in commands in the chat box to perform actions, let me show you. The game already teaches you this fairly early in the game with emotes such as bow and yes. But you could add in additional commands if you for these emotes to do something more specific like slash bow motion, which will perform the bow without giving it any text prompt. With this in mind, you can perform battle actions the same way. For example, slash AC, meaning action, Vercure, which is the red mage's healing spell, and giving it a target is me. As you can see, I performed a battle action just by typing it into the chat box. By understanding this much, you could start filling in the macro page with all sorts of text commands. Anyways, the pros of using a macro is that you can perform many different actions with a single button press. The con of using a macro is that you don't gain any kind of special buffer between actions, which is built into the system itself. So, if you want to perform actions with precision, then using a macro is definitely not going to help you. Still, there's only a small number of people that could perform entire rotations with perfect precision 100% of the time through a 15-minute, 20-minute, maybe even a 30-minute fight. So, for us normal players, it's actually better to use a macro, which is not precise, but it would make things a lot easier. Okay. So before we get started, let's go into character settings and turn off a few things. We'll go into the log window settings and we're going to turn off error messages when actions fail and recast timer error messages. Okay. After that, I'll explain the type of actions you're gonna want to well, you want to understand what kind of actions you want to understand what type of actions you have. So let's go into the menu, actions. As you can see, this is a global cooldown attack. As you can see, it's an instant cast and it has a recast at 250, meaning it's a global cooldown attack. Then we have moves like, let's see, Core, which is a instant cast with a 40-second recast timer. Since this is not on a global cooldown, you could use this at any time between... Well, you could use it anytime when it's available. Then we want to concentrate on the range of these attacks. Because if a action is out of range, the macro won't perform the action. So, let's get to macro crafting. User macros. For this sake, let's go to a new hotbar. And let's create a new macro. First, let's turn macro errors off, or let's turn the macro error messages off. Otherwise, it's gonna flood your chat with error messages if you don't do this. So, macro error off. Okay. Next, we'll put in our melee command, riposte. And we'll set it to target. Okay. With that in mind, let's put this here. Okay, so every time I press this macro, I will perform a riposte. But if I use it all out of range, it won't do anything at all. So we'll add in a different command after this, such as Jolt, which is a red mage's starting range attack. And since macros read from top to down, or from top down, it will first check if you could do riposte. If it cannot perform riposte, it will perform jolt. So, this means, up close, I will, if I use the macro, I'll perform riposte. But, if I'm out of range, I'll perform jolt. So, that's easy enough to understand, but if I keep pressing the button, it's not going to do anything during global cooldowns. So, I'm going to add in commands that are off global cooldown. Let's do something like core. The target and displacement. A target. For extra measure. Well, maybe not yet. Anyways. So, by using the macro now, I'll perform additional actions whenever I'm in global cooldown and can't perform any other actions in the meantime. But now core and displacement are in cooldown, so with a macro this short, it will only perform these. Well, it's useful, but not exactly the most effective. So, let's add in even more commands. So, let's add in additional off-global commands to our single macro, such as Contra 6 and Flush. and flush. So, with a single macro command, now I'll be performing any of those 4 off-global cooldowns. So, yeah, it looks a bit fancy, but that's just a single button press. And even then, the macro's incomplete. So, let's add in additional commands, especially buffs, like let's see, what's it called? Lucid dreaming and acceleration. Okay. Dreaming. For this, you don't actually need anything, but if you want, you can add in me, which will work just as well if you, even if you don't have a target in mind. So, do that. So, with this, not only is my macro going to perform global cooldown attacks, it's going to perform off global cooldown attacks, and if the off global cooldown attacks are not available, it's going to apply buffs. So, let's see it in motion. Yeah, I know it looks fancy, but that's just one button press. As you can see, it's already sequenced through all those button commands, and whenever the off global cooldowns come back, I'll be able to perform I'll be able to perform them as soon as they're available. And as a bonus, let's add in a macro icon. This will let you know if a move is off cooldown. Since you can't do it for every single one, I suggest picking one that you want to look out for. Like, for example, I want to see when flesh is off cooldown. So, macro icon, or you could type in the whole thing, or I think M icon is enough, but just for this video's sake, let's go with macro icon. Flesh. So, as you can see, now my macro icon turned into flesh. So, every time I use flesh, I could tell when it's on and off cooldown. So now you understand the basics of making a macro for a battle class. Okay. Reset striking dummy. Okay. With that in mind, you basically want to make a whole series of these for any particular battle class. Depending on how complicated the battle class is, you could have a few with like these for PvP. Like I have these for PvP, or you could be more complex. Like all these I have for red mage. Anyways, by no means am I gonna perform well. Macro users like myself perform optimally like the long-time Final Fantasy XIV pros, but at the same time, macro users like myself that have macros such as these won't exactly be performing poorly either. So, those are my views on macros, and I think you shouldn't be afraid of using them on your combat classes. Anyways, I hope this video